Good evening. I'd like to call to order the June 5th, 2019 Bothell Planning Commission meeting. First item, public comments. Seeing no one in the public, we'll move on to approval of minutes. I'm hoping everyone got a chance to look at the May 15th, 2019 minutes. Can I get a motion to approve or any notes to change?
Move to approve the May 15th, 2019 minutes.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
One thing I forgot was attendance. All commissioners are present and accounted for with the exception of Commissioner David Vliet, who is absent and excused, and we wish him a speedy recovery. New business, it looked like Councilmember Dewar can't make it today.
Councilmember Dewar is not able to attend today, so there is no report.
All right. No public hearing, so moving into the study session. Senior Planner Bruce Blackburn, do you want to lead us through the housekeeping code amendments 2019?
Absolutely. This is, of course, our annual housekeeping amendments. We do a bunch of changes to the codes to make them clearer, take care of inconsistencies and things like that. We had a briefing on May 15th where the Planning Commission provided some really excellent comments to us that you're going to see reflected within your memorandum, as well as some of the provisions. And of course, this is a study session, so no action is requested, but we would like to have some Planning Commission feedback and discussion about these suggested amendments so that when we come to the public hearing on June 19th, we can actually have a really robust condition, maybe even approve those at that night. And of course, these are, of course, housekeeping amendments to improve clarity, remove incorrect references, and improve efficiency. And in 2019, our docket contained 8 of these type of amendments that we're going to tackle this year. And I'm just going to kind of go right through them. They're listed in alphabetical order, no necessarily hierarchy to that order. And the first one, of course, was a question about cluster subdivision PUDs. And those provisions allow incentives to preservation of open space. And one of the questions that was asked was, should those incentives be provided to multifamily residential developments? I.e., if a multifamily residential development provides open space, should they have the benefit of seeking those incentives, which is basically would be an increased number of dwelling units? The Planning Commission discussion points from May 15th, you wanted to add we wanted to have some data on applications that we've received about clustering PUDs, which we put into your memorandum. There's a lot of coming in. We've got a tremendous amount of open space being preserved. We got in the 8 or 9, 10 applications we've received, we've got 10 acres of open space preserved. And about 19 bonus lots is what has been requested in those particular applications. Interestingly enough, some of the applications don't even ask for bonus lots. They just want to take advantage of the greater flexibility of the clustered PUD regulations and say, hey, look, we're only going to put in 4 or 6 or 8 lots. We're not after it. We're just after that additional flexibility. You get tremendous benefit from the amount of open space preserved. So essentially what the Commission talked about at the May 15th was, could the clustering PUD incentives for multifamily include an affordable housing provision, i.e. instead of bonus units or something like that, or open space, maybe we could provide something like affordable housing provision. And that's a really awesome concept that we want to talk a little bit more about the Commission about. One of the other items is that as we were kind of doing some of the final preparation for the memorandum, Development Review staff said, hey, we have one other issue that we'd like you to talk with the Commission about, and that is we have a couple applications that are asking really narrow strips of land to be counted as space. And they said, look, we have to have some type of a minimum dimension to make sure we don't get those 5 or 8 foot wide strips running down the back or the side of a development. So we've identified that we should have a minimum, our recommendation is our minimum 20-foot dimension for any open space practice provided. Back to the original question of whether incentives should be applied to multifamily, you've got some alternatives. One is yes, apply to multifamily residential zones. Yes, but only apply to lower density multifamily zones such as the R5400A or R4000. That would be a couple of those lower densities that you could really do some significant amount of clustering or reduction instead of building townhomes or detached condominiums, maybe build something like a fourplex or something of that nature that would really get some more areas. Or if the commission would like to do this, we could put that part on hold until 2020 and look at an affordable housing incentive. If we decide to do that, we probably should put that off a little bit because, we just don't have the time to do it right now. But I think it's a very worthy thing to consider. And so we're kind of looking for some direction on the Planning Commission on that item. So we'll come back to this a little bit later on. The next one was there's a provision within the comp plan and the code to do whole numbers when you do lot area and or dwelling unit count. And basically the comp plan and most sections of the code require it be a whole number. However, we've had some applicants get confused about that and thinking, well, we can apply, 0.6 lot, we'll get an extra one. No, it doesn't. That's what the comp plan says. So basically at the May 15th meeting, the commission said, yeah, we concur that we need to just do this on whole numbers. That's what our plan language is. And you also asked about what other jurisdictions do, particularly what jurisdictions allow rounding up and what jurisdictions prohibit rounding up. And so I just took a sample of some local, adjacent almost, jurisdictions, and you can see that some jurisdictions, Snow County, King County, Kenmore, Kirkland, Woodinville, allow rounding up. If you get more than 0.5 unit, you get to round up. Other jurisdictions, however, don't, just very similar to what the city of Bothell does, and that includes Mill Creek, Edmonds, Linwood, and Briar. So it's, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some jurisdictions think it's a worthwhile thing to consider, others don't. Right now, because our plan is very clear that we can allow it, we would have to look at this and say, okay, our code has to reflect our plan. We can allow it, but it was kind of interesting to do this exercise. The next one is a time provision. Right now, our code requires an applicant to resubmit for information within 90 days of when the city identifies you've got an issue with your code or with their application. That's a really tight time frame, particularly with the complexity and some of the pretty broad requirements we now have in North Dakota regulation. And so we're thinking about doing 180 days. On May 15th, the commission said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to expand that. The commission also said, but what if you have a really complex special study or some kind of a litigation going on? Maybe we should grant a little bit extra time. So we've got some language in the regulation that says, yeah, you get another 180 days if you have one of those type of things that are outside the influence or control of the applicant. And that's basically the provision that we've provided in there. Another one is deduction of surface water facilities from net buildable area. In 2015, the city of Bothell said, look, we're no longer going to deduct surface water facilities from your net buildable area or your lot area. And basically that was something that we were taking out quite a bit of our capacity. The Planning Commission said, well, that's fine, but could we maybe just limit that deduction to the type of LID facilities that are much more LID friendly, I guess it would be like bioretention or some type of a forest retention of some type. Some of those other things that are really, really more important. Unfortunately, we can't do that because our plan is very clear. The plan says we don't deduct those. So if we were to decide to say, well, we want to change that, we'd have to change the plan as well as that. So right now, what we think we would want to do is that we would recommend that we go ahead and make this change. It's almost a Scrivener's error. Every place else in the plan and the code took this out except this one location that we'd want to do that. But it would certainly be a topic for a future discussion if the commission so desires. One of the other things that we're trying to clean up is that there's subdistricts A and B within the North Creek Northeast 195th Street subarea. This is an old holdover from many, many years of planning back in the 80s, in fact. And the Planning Commission said, great, that's fine, but could we just remove the references to sub-district A and B within those calculations? And, the district boundaries should really be clarified. Unfortunately, the sub-area plan actually does make reference to those sub-areas, sub-district A and B. So again, we're stuck with the comprehensive plan has got a very specific provision there. So essentially what you've got here with your packet is that we've basically amended the language to more accurately describe those sub-districts. And we're going to put in a new map that looks something like this, that clearly shows that this area right here in the southeast corner which is the one that was giving us the problem, is in Subdistrict A. That's really where it's supposed to be. So we're going to put this map in the code somehow, and so that there's very clear what is Subdistrict A and what is Subdistrict B. The importance of that is because Subdistrict A and B have different building height provisions as well as some different setback provisions. So we still need to have some clarification on that. Yes.
And that area you referred to is the Seattle Times parcel?
No, Seattle Times is right here.
Oh, okay, so.
This is the
Oh, that's retail,
Archstone.
okay.
Yeah, well,
And the
it's-
exercise facility?
Yeah, the exercise facility is right there, and this is a big multifamily residential complex here. I think it was used to be called Archstone. Now it's got another name, and I don't recall what it is. So yeah, and it, you can see it's already developed. So, it's one of those interesting things. It's kind of a fact of nature, but it is in Subdistrict A.
So I wasn't here May 15th, but I heard you say something interesting I wanted to ask. You said that it was causing us problems. Can you clarify what the problems are?
Yeah, and the issues was that applicants are saying, well, wait, which sub-district am I in? Which building height am I allowed to do? Particularly when they were talking about a couple of projects down at this location. There was a couple small little parcels, they don't show up very well here, that are available for development. And they're like, well, wait, am I in Subdistrict A? Do I get a 65-foot height, or am I in Subdistrict B and I only have 35-foot height? So this clarifies that for those parcels. And they're really small parcels. Another one is clarifying sign height and how sign height is measured. We've had applicants come in and say, well, I don't have to count the foundation or the support base for that sign, right? And we're saying, no, you do have to count that. It's from your average, your city-approved finished grade. And so it's a very simple code amendment. The Planning Commission said, well, yeah, include an illustration because that really helps as well. But a question was, would earth berms or some type of mounding allow somebody to have a little bit taller height? And we took a look at that, and there's a provision within the regulations that are defined that landscape earth berms are not included in city-approved finished grade. So they can't do some kind of mounding on the side. And here's our little illustration. They couldn't mound up, a little landscape berm here and get another 2 or 3 feet. That's prohibited by the measurement of city finish. So we're pretty good in shape from that standpoint. Oh, and that's the illustration we're going to put, unless you want something different. The second one is amend Title 11 to define detached condominium units. And this is an interesting one because we have a lot of these detached condominiums, and they look just exactly like single-family residential developments. And the Planning Commission said, yeah, we do need to have some type of a detached condominium definition. And so our suggestion is to steal most of the language out of our current definition for condominium, but just say, call them condominium detached, and maybe a little bit more information about they do have the appearance of a single family, but they remain a detached condominium. A little bit more information. This is some photographs of some of those projects. Again, they look just like single family, which makes it somewhat a little bit confusing, particularly the people who buy them and then they sign their papers and say, it says condominium here. But we've had a few stories about that. And of course, it's an interesting practice that the RCWs allow for condominiums. You basically, instead of a piece of land that's described in a plat, you have a cube of area that can include the land, that is the condominium area that you're responsible for. So it's a very interesting segment of state law that every couple of years we hope they go and they fix that. But so far that hasn't happened. The final one that's really interesting is amend Title 11 about procedures for plan and code amendments to reflect some of our current practice and structure. And this was really interesting because when we started talking about this with the Planning Commission, there was some, okay, yeah, we want to clarify this collaboration process, make it easier. The Planning Commission also said, the commission should be the main voice of the comprehensive plan, definitely, as well as the development regulations that derive from that comprehensive plan. The other thing the Planning Commission said, we should take advantage of the expertise and the knowledge of our other advisory bodies. We have some really great advisory bodies here, Shoreline Board, Landmark Preservation Board, Parks and Rec Board, that we should have some mechanism to take advantage of their knowledge. And so basically what we've done is we've got kind of, the other thing the commission asked is, we were talking about maybe removing some of the code language that you currently have to review, Title 17 Transportation, Title 18 Utilities. And you said, well, what are some of the flavor of some of those recent amendments in those two titles? And so we provided that for the commission as well. One of the interesting things that we've done here is that we've kind of got this new process, and it's not even a new process, it's just kind of clarifying it. But we've got a couple of things. We have recommendation, we have consult with. And consult with means one of the boards would come to the commission and give you advice and direction and their input on a particular plan amendment. Let's say natural environment. It makes sense to have the shoreline board come in and consult with the planning commission. But the planning commission will be the main recommending body on plan amendments, and that was one of the really important things to do that. One of the other things we've done, we've kind of expanded the role of the landmark preservation and the Parks and Recreation Board. We weren't really taking advantage of their expertise in some of the elements that we've got, particularly Parks and Recreation element, and of course the historic preservation element. So we did a lot of clarification of the roles and responsibilities of the board, and actually have a lot more consultation and recommendation provisions. That's pretty neat, and we're kind of excited about this because this is the new process we'll use when we do our 2023 comprehensive plan update. So we'll have this all set and ready to go when that comes up. As well as, of course, the synopsis of some of the recent amendments to that. And these are this is the synopsis. On the left is Title 17 Transportation. On the right is Title 18 Utilities. And our analysis identifies that Title 17 amendments to the code have some policy implications. You know, you're talking about traffic impact mitigation. You're talking about impact thresholds. You're talking about sidewalk widths, a bunch of those things that really do have policy connotations. That's why our recommendation is that the Planning Commission should continue to be the advisory body to the City Council, and then the Planning Commission make a recommendation to the City Council. Title 18 is a little different because that's when there's a lot of really highly technical things with water and sewer and things like that. The most recent big, I would call it, code amendment was fats, oils, and grease amendments, and I think we came to the Planning Commission and told you about that, and you guys were like, okay, what are we going to talk about? Something interesting. That's just a joke. But and then you can see a whole bunch of utility sewer rate changes, some sewer billing payment provisions, and all those. We don't think Title 18 has near the policy connotation that Title 17 does. So our recommendation to you is that the Planning Commission would not put a recommendation for Title 18 amendments, but would continue to provide a recommendation to Title 17 amendments. And this just basically duplicates what's in your packet. Basically, this is how we would look at, okay, land use element, Planning Commission consults with Shorelines Board, if Shorelines Jurisdiction, Parks and Recreation Board, and Landmark Preservation Board to bring them in for their own expertise, and then the Planning Commission would continue to make a recommendation. That's kind of the flavor of the provisions we've got here. And of course, certainly we've had to add the shorelines element, because that's an element of our comprehensive plan now that we did not have in this table, as well as the Parks and Recreation element, which we really want to take advantage of that Parks and Recreation Board. And in fact, this year they're working on an update to their PROS plan, their Parks, Recreation, Open Space plan, that they will be forming a recommendation. We want them to bring that to the commission and talk to you about that, because it's, again, that's a really critical function of our community, is the Parks and Recreation element. And you can see some things that we've done, a couple things, housing and human services, okay, the Planning Commission clearly should make a recommendation. The Shorelines Board doesn't have a lot of influence or a lot of provisions regarding those items. And you can see some of the other things, urban design element, again, that's really clearly a Planning Commission function. Sub-area plans, again, the same thing, we'd bring in those other boards, particularly Parks and Recreation if we're talking about doing something different to a park, and of course, historic preservation, because they have a lot of important information about historic preservation districts that we have or may not have, and so that's something that we're kind of excited about doing this one. And of course, the amendments provisions are still pretty much similar. Really, the only change is really the Title 18 that we'd be actually looking at. One of the other things is, again, we've added some of the consults language in a couple of locations where it made a lot of sense to have some additional consultation on those things. So that will end my presentation. Sorry, it went a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but So questions, discussions, answers, all of those fun things. Thank you.
Nice, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I thought we'd go with general questions and then maybe do a page turn. I know you're not looking for specific direction, but there were a few options in there that it might be
Yes.
might be worthy to take a look at and give
I'm
some
going to go to the beginning.
initial. Okay, perfect. So do any commissioners have some general questions for Bruce? Okay, so we'll start with item A, which was the PUD clustering provision.
And on this, I've kind of got the general alternatives for the commission to think about, or maybe there's something else the commission would like to think about. And depending upon which one you pick, we'll amend the regulations accordingly for the hearing on the 19th.
Okay, one quick question before we kind of delve into this one. Is there a combined answer on the alternatives here? Meaning, can we pick up affordable housing later but still address something now with the, options 1 or 2?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a lot of flexibility here.
Okay.
Question, are you able to pull up the table that shows the applications or inquiries about, was that in your presentation?
For the
table that
clustering
shows
provision?
Yeah, you had a table on page 3 of the packet that shows the applications to date,
You bet.
and you have 19 units, and I just had a question about the table and the last 2 items there.
See, we did have the packet pulled up.
PDF? I think it opens up under the edge. The little E on the bottom,
There it is. Sorry.
is that it?
Yep. There we go.
Okay, thank you. So the first of, I think, 2 questions for the Clyde Hill and Piper's Crest sections, is that 604,000 square feet of open space accurate, or is there a typo there?
That's accurate.
So
What
there,
they did is that they are in an area that has a really large lot. It's basically our 40,000 zone.
okay,
And they were really able to take advantage of that massive amount of lot size reduction. And this is one where they didn't even ask for bonus lots. They said, no, we're perfectly happy getting these 12 lots. What that allows us to do, instead of having these lots that go way back into the forest or way back into some other areas and kind of go back and forth, they were able to cluster it out and actually make that a dedicated tract. It's amazing.
okay,
Is your total off there?
right, that was my impetus
Oh,
behind.
you're right.
Oh, so about that, how,
There is something wrong there.
you're quite
Why did that happen there?
blank Excel.
Yeah, that was the impetus behind the question.
Yeah,
The
I see,
total-
I see, I
okay.
see.
Is it 60,000?
It could be 60,000.
Yeah, even 12 times 40 is going to be a challenge to get to 604,000.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
it
and
is,
I did
yeah.
a quick, yeah, I think it's probably 60.
It could be 60, yes. I'm confident this 10.3 acres, I may have, I don't know, we were doing this.
Either way, that's pretty great. And I think you answered my second question by answering the first, so thank you.
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah. Sorry about that math.
I have a very specific question, and the sentence is right there. Staff suggests open space tracts to have minimum dimension of 20 feet.
Yes.
Matches. Can you describe to me what that looks like if I was standing there?
Oh, well, it's about the distance between,
Okay, maybe not that far, just. Are we saying that it's a minimum of 20 feet by 20 feet? Is that what I'm
oh, no. The minimum dimension would be 20 feet. And so in any location within that open space tract, you couldn't go less than a dimension of 20 feet. So it could be, you could have 150 feet over here and 20 feet over here or something like that. The intention was to try and get those narrow strips from happening.
Okay, maybe I'm not,
I wish I had a map.
I feel like I too want to prevent the minimum, the small strips. So you're saying there would be 150 feet by 20 feet
That's a possibility.
preserved.
Yes.
In my opinion, that seems still small. And
Not great, yeah.
maybe I'm missing something.
Well, and that's part of the issue is what number do you pick? And is it 20 feet or is it a greater dimension? One of the elements about the PUD that's kind of important is that we can say, listen, this has to be a better than application. And some of the developments that are proposed really narrow strips, the argument has been, you're not better than, so it's not going to meet the test. Therefore, you need to do a much better job with that. It would be nice to have a minimum dimension here. But, you know, we can kind of work on some other numbers if you think maybe a larger number would be okay.
So is that, you're saying the 20 feet matches the mandatory setback? So is that
Yes.
20 feet in addition to the mandatory setback?
It has to be a separate open space tract, so it would be, yes.
Okay, so you're going to have the setback, and then you're going to have another 20 feet. So there'd be,
Or vice versa. It could be a tract around it and then the 20-foot setback, yes, sorry.
okay, but either way, from the boundary line to the edge of development is going to be a minimum of 40 feet. Because you've got the setback, and then you've got the open space, if that's the location the open space is in.
To the building, yes.
Yeah, to the building.
It could be a yard area.
So the yard area could be included,
In the-
could be included in the setback, yeah,
Yes,
okay, got that. Thank you.
I'm thinking of a good question. I'm just struggling. Like, so in Holly Hills, where I live near, they have green space belts throughout the community, and they are 20-ish feet wide. And you know, there's definitely part of me that appreciates them. They're green space, but they are effectively unusable space, and I think that's okay. And so I'm just kind of just trying to envision what we're trying to accomplish here, and that's why I'm asking the question. But I don't have a formulated question. It's just, you know, if I think of this 60,000 square foot saved area here, and that's in a 20-foot form factor, like that's quite large. And I imagine that's not that it. Maybe I must be missing something.
If I may, since we're dealing with similar issues in downtown, although maybe the dimensional issues are different, a 20-foot is the minimum dimension for downtown public open space, and one type of public open space in the downtown plan is a passage. So a 20-foot wide space with a 6-foot wide minimum path through it. So you could imagine a suburban development that had a series of these that created pedestrian connections through, and that could be a very viable use of open space.
Bruce, didn't we have this discussion when we were looking at clustering to begin with? I thought we established a minimum. Oh,
Interestingly enough, we did not. In fact, one of the things that I looked at that when the development review said, well, it's in there, right? And I looked and it was not. I believe, and I may be incorrect here, is that I believe that the concept was that it didn't make a lot of sense to have a whole bunch of little separate spaces because it really wasn't going to save you very much. But I think that one of the things I want to do is I definitely want to have a minimum dimension here. And if it's 20 or 25 or even 40 feet or 50 feet, I think that that's something that we can do a little bit more information on, and we can bring back some options for you at the hearing. But yeah, we want to have basically a minimum dimension. So.
with regards to the options that you're asking us about, do you guys have any feedback to give staff ahead of our next meeting? So there was 3 options on how we want to proceed for next time.
So I'm going to close out really quick on the 20 feet conversation. Like, I really appreciated what Dave pointed out, and like Holly Hills, they won't, but there could have been when they designed the neighborhood, they could have absolutely put a nice 6-foot winding walkway, and it would actually utilize that space, although I'm not inclined to utilize it. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about the 20 feet. I think 20 feet is fine. We don't want to be an impediment here. So, you know, like I'd rather have 20 feet of unusable space than force somebody to go 40 feet or something like that. So that's where I'm at on it. I think I'm just trying to envision how this would work out. So I'm just, thank you for answering my questions. I don't really have a direction on that.
Well, and with the commission's permission, I can provide a little bit more data on that. We can kind of show some of the relative, a couple of the projects that came through that had really narrow strips. Okay, we don't want that. And some of the projects that have got strips that were more appropriate. And maybe there's a number there.
I know in Seattle and other urban contexts, parklets and sizes that are really small really add a lot to the area. And so I don't want to enforce that large areas are the only things that we should be preserving as open space. Sometimes small areas are important too. So I think it's good to leave that a little bit flexible.
Thinking about the space, and Commissioner Moreau-Cook raised some questions about how it might be used. Is it open space? Is it public space that's accessible to people? Is it preserved for native vegetation? I, in my previous life, have experience with neighbors of public space having their backyards grow, and what was public space becomes private space. Is that something that we need to think about?
Well, as a matter of fact, one of the things that we make sure of is that these are placed into separate tracts. They aren't part of somebody's lot via an easement, because what you have identified, we had a lot of these kind of native growth protection easements around the city, and that's exactly what happened. All of a sudden, we looked and there was all this nice native vegetation that's all gone now. It's a lawn that somebody just kind of, oh, well, this is my property. So that's why we put them into separate tracts. And then the tracts are protected by the neighbors. So wait, that's part of our land too. What are you using our land, when going into this tract? But I hear what you're saying. Certainly the idea is that we want to preserve large portions of a lot that have a really great function. And of course, the hierarchy of the PUD is very clear. Okay, large forested areas, existing trees, and those things. You got to go through the hierarchy. And getting down to the active spaces, like at the end of the hierarchy, basically, okay, you got to make sure you don't have one of those things that you can preserve first and all the way down here. And that's where the PUD has been very useful and effective, honestly, is to say, oh, no, time out, no. You have this area available to do as open space. That's the area you should do because that's the hierarchy. So that's part of what the hearing examiner does as well. He evaluates, okay, wait, this is a PUD, you're getting a special provision, and particularly with the bonus lots. You must have some mechanism to make sure that you're getting something, the community is getting something, and it's a benefit to the community. And so it's kind of like that exchange kind of a concept. But I think that this is a good thing for us to provide some more information to the commission on. I am really happy to do that, and I can do that pretty easily. And maybe we can say, okay, here's kind of what a 30-foot number would look like. Here's what a 40-foot number would look like. But I do want to have a minimum number someplace in this code.
And I'm interested in making sure that it's clearly delineated, and you've indicated it's a separate track, so that's a good
Yeah, it is, must be in a tract, yes.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up to that. If someone did grow their yard into one of these tracks and it was discovered 20 years later, what's the process?
Very similar to other code enforcement actions. Essentially what we're going to look at is we're going to say, wait, you have an approved plat, and that plat has got specific provisions. You are in violation of that plat. You must return that area to what it was supposed to be, and whether it's that's one of the things we do with wetland buffers. A lot of wetland buffers get put into, and then the code enforcement officer goes in and says, you can't do this. You got to move your fence back to this point. And we basically plot it out where it's supposed to be, because we've got the records, we've got the surveys and all those things. And basically the idea is you got to restore this area.
So there's a little bit more protection than, like, as I understand it, because I have the situation, my neighbor's fence was put on my yard years ago. And as I understand it, I believe, I'm not going to claim this is true, I believe that there's possession is ownership at this after a certain amount of threshold, but that
Yes.
does not necessarily apply in this situation.
No, it should not, because basically the idea is that this is a designated and preserved open space tract that has a very unique function, a very specific function. And it's a little different because it has the ability to be enforced by the city.
Who owns this land?
Basically, those kind of tracts are held in undivided interest within the people who live within the development. So everybody has a little piece of that land. And one of the reasons we went to tracts instead of like using easements was that the folks who live there were our best eyes and ears. If they heard chainsaws, or if they heard activities, they were on the phone to us right away.
So ownership of that tract, which is open space, would lie with the PUD, which is the aggregate of the future owners of the properties within it?
Yes,
Okay,
that's one way to put it.
all right.
Now, there's a couple other options too. They can dedicate it to the city. They can have another type of a land preservation, agency, maintain it of some type. But generally what it does, it just becomes an undivided interest tract.
Okay. Well, again, I do have some experience in this, and I know that you cannot gain ownership of government land through adverse possession.
Right. It is. It's a long one.
Okay, Bruce, thanks for coming back next time with some more information on the width. So with regards to what we're looking at on the screen and one of the main points of the section, do we have any direction for staff on what our preference is or between those three options?
But before I talk about my preference, can I make one more comment?
Sure.
It sounds like this is going to come back to us with some additional information. So my question is on the affordable housing component. If we did decide to include multifamily in the PUD opportunities, how would we not rule out being able to add the affordable housing component later? Because if we're not giving them something more, can we add another constraint?
That's a good question. I think what would happen is that, in fact, this is an item that we were thinking about when we were doing the clustering provision. Okay, what if we eventually wanted to add an affordable housing component? What you do is you'd do either open space or affordable housing as be your bonus. So basically what would happen is that 20 lot subdivision, instead of providing 20 or 30,000 square feet open space, would provide 4 or 5 affordable housing units to get their bonus densities. So it'd be basically you'd take either this path or this path. You're absolutely right. It'd be tough to require both of those items.
Okay. And we could come up with would it have to be an equal value, or we could just arbitrarily come up with a number?
Well, you try and match it to a certain value. And the other is, okay, if you only get one more lot, you wouldn't be able to require a lot of affordable housing provisions. If you got 10 more lots, well, maybe you can add more. So it would have to have some type of a percentage or some type of a correlation to the amount of incentive you provided. Very similar to what we do with the open space.
Okay, but we'd be safe moving forward without ruling that out.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so, yes. Yeah, and so, and we can make sure and the record shows that the commission has a desire to put this as a 2020 docket item.
Okay, so now if I could answer.
Sure.
Vice Chair Cabe. I'm trying to, is it chair today? But, so I think we're always looking for opportunities to preserve open space. And if we have, potential 148 lots that are in the pipeline and will likely or may likely get developed between now and 2020 when we have time to talk about the affordable housing, I think that it would be worthy to include the multifamily opportunity for the PUD. With that being said, I think it's very important to always look for opportunities for more affordable housing, because it's very likely that 148 of these will be above the threshold that's affordable for many people. So I definitely want to bring that back.
Yeah, anybody else?
I agree. I'd like to see us go forward tonight, or when this comes back to the agenda, applying it, and I'd say to all multifamily residential, and then look at affordable housing in the future.
So that would be all affordable housing zones.
I think so.
Okay.
Or all multifamily
Or, yeah, sorry, multifamily zones.
with
My
affordable
apologies.
coming in play
Right,
2020.
okay.
Okay, let's move on to item B, the rounding up.
That was two, is that kind of the consensus of the commission?
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay,
agree.
all right, I'm just making sure, because, all right, thank you.
Moving on to the clarify the prohibition of rounding up on the lot yield. Thanks for providing the feedback on the other neighboring jurisdictions. Is there any discussion on this one? Okay, and we're currently prohibiting it. Seeing none, let's move forward to item C, amend Title 11 administration to give applicants 180 days to resubmit additional materials requested by the city. Currently, that's 90 days. Commissioner Hampton?
Yeah, I don't see any issues with this, as presented by staff.
Agreed.
I appreciate the extra 180 days in unique circumstances because I think that's important.
Okay, moving on to D. Correct the Title 12 and zoning requiring deduction of surface water facilities from net buildable area, which is inconsistent with other sections of the code and comp plan. Any discussion?
I think the points that were brought up by Chair Vliet last week about consideration of the kind of the magnitude of the surface water facility are important, but given the fact that this is, you know, about a code amendment and essentially a Scrivener's error, I think we should move forward with the staff recommendation.
Okay, see it nodding heads. I definitely agree, Commissioner Hampton. Item E, clarify sub-area descriptions in Title 12 of the North Creek Northeast 195th Street sub-area.
I have a real nitpicky, I don't have a problem with this, but do you have, could you bring the map up real
You
quick?
bet.
In the middle, right above sub-district D, it was confusing to me at first read where it said R2, 800, how it's on a separate
Oh.
line.
Sorry, that's the way the convention is for this mapping. It's R2800 OP.
It took me two glances to catch it.
Sorry.
I don't know if that's something we can fix or if it's normal, and I just wanted to call that out.
It depends on what scale you are at, and it does that, yeah, so.
We're stuck with it.
It's a GIS thing, yeah. If you blow it up, it doesn't do it that way, but,
Okay.
yeah.
Like I said, I saw it first. I was like, what's this? And then it took me a few seconds and I saw that it was a completed 2800 and it's fine. But
Yeah.
the amendment itself, let's move forward with it, is my opinion.
Question, if you don't mind, Bruce. You referenced two properties that were small parcels and aren't shown on this map. I think I know where they're at. They would be in sub-district A.
Mostly they'd be in sub-district A, yes. There's a small one here. Well, there's a little bit of something that could happen way over here, but yeah,
Okay.
it's mostly sub-district A where those parcels were. But when, I know that this really came up when the the fitness facility came in. There was some confusion, well, wait, are they A or B? And that was a pretty important distinction to make sure we have that followed,
Okay.
particularly with redevelopment,
Pardon me?
particularly if we start getting redevelopment out here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I support the staff recommendation on this as well.
Okay, moving forward to item F, clarify the title regarding sign height. Code is unclear on the overall sign height. It includes the base foundations. So thanks for the added detail. I think it helped kind of clear up what we discussed last time around. Do we have any discussion on this one? Okay, looks good. Moving forward to item G, amend Title 11 to define detached condominium units. Go ahead.
I have a very nitpicky outward appearance. Is there a definition of that? Is I mean, to me it makes sense. I'm just afraid someone might take it too far. and the next part is if it's normal, then I'm fine with it. It's just, it struck me as kind of what is an outward appearance of a single-family home?
There you go. I'm sorry. You should
It's
give
fine,
my
it's
insight.
fine. Honestly, Bruce, I'll take that, but yeah.
I could just say has the appearance, get rid of the outward. How about if we go with it as the appearance of a single-family residence?
Fantastic. I removed a word from our code today. That's great.
Anybody else? Okay, and the last item, H, amend the Title 11, Procedures for Planning Code Amendments to reflect current structure and practices.
Yeah, this one should be fun to talk about because it's kind of a neat approach.
Any comments?
So do you have any concerns or thoughts about how this may impact timing of review? And clearly, you're going to have to look at different bodies' schedules and get
Yes.
things on the agendas in time.
Yes, and that's one of the things that we are more concerned about than anything else, particularly with the 2023 plan amendment coming up. We're going to be hopping pretty strongly there. We do have those concerns, but we also believe that if you make the process better, and that, that means including maybe having one extra meeting instead of, having 3 meetings, have 4 or whatever it happens to be. We think that has a lot of value. And so it was a tough one, but we said, no, we should have those other boards and commissions consulting with the commission.
And I agree, having the consultation being explicit is a good thing. I would hope that the council is aware of, or when this comes forward, that they're informed of the impact and that it will require coordination and it may add a meeting here or there.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of have that little bit of once we get a kind of a good feel for how the commission would like to go, we're going to take a little bit more time and think about what that'll be. Now, I will say that we do have good relationship. Of course, the Historic Preservation Board is run by our division, and our Parks and Recreation group, we're doing a lot of really good coordination. So I think that we can probably make that work.
Seeing no other discussion, is there anything else, Bruce, that you need direction from before we come back next time?
I just want to make sure that the commission is comfortable with taking the utilities regulations away from the commission, so you don't have to talk about sewer rates and fog and all these kind of things. I just want to make, and as well as the commission is supportive of the concept of transportation has a different feel, and that is, it does have policy things. I just want to make sure the commission is like, yeah, that's our thought process as well.
I think my only concern at first about reading the utility discussion would be removed is if in the future some of the areas that are thought to be, annexed were annexed, that there was a little bit more discussion at the planning commission or, pre-council level about some of the ways that might affect those. But I can't think how that would exactly happen, but I mean, because there's likely more septic tanks and there's more impact. And again, I don't know how that would impact it, but it just made me think about that, so.
Well, interestingly enough, you mentioned that because our remaining annexation areas are within Snohomish County. And so, of course, which is the Alderwood Water and Wastewater District, as well as, of course, the Snohomish County Health District takes advantage of those areas. We contract with Alderwood Water and Wastewater and Snohomish County Health District on those areas in the city that are exist in Snohomish County anyway. So I think it's a relationship we've built over the years, and you're correct that it will add more pressure to the concept of going from sanitary sewer, going to sanitary sewer, but not necessarily. Usually that's a function of when their septic system fails. And if they have sanitary sewer in the area, which is provided by Alderwood Water and Sewer Wastewater District, you got to connect. And that's a regulation that's actually out of state law more than it is locally. But the Snohomish County Health District kind of contracts with the city to provide those kind of services. So even if they're in the city, we're going to say, well, you got to go talk to the health district about that septic system and whether you can make a connection to a sanitary sewer.
Okay, so I'm thinking about if this happened and somebody was on a corner lot versus just a single frontage, the rates might be different. Would that change if they were annexed into Bothell, or they would still fall under, are those rules governed by the city code or by Alderwood Water District's policies?
Alderwood Water District is the district that has that responsibility.
Okay, and that wouldn't likely change if we annexed them? They couldn't leave that district, or?
No, they
Okay.
are, yeah. The only way that happens is if Alderwood Water and Sewer District de-annexes a portion of their district.
Okay.
And that's not a likely occurrence.
Okay. Well, thanks for helping me understand that better. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Curd?
One of the questions that I was thinking of when I was looking through the utility section was if a new design district is ever proposed for, say, Canyon Park area, and utility poles in that area start having design level changes, would that fall under this section of the municipal code, or?
That's where we're lucky because the Planning Commission still has the authority underneath sub-areas and Title 12. And that's probably where a lot of that would be identified when we do the actual detailed design work on the Canyon Park area. We're probably going to talk about what that look and feature will be, and then you just mandate that. And then we turn it over to Snohomish County PUD and say, these are the poles we're going to have in this area. And then we're going to talk to them about making sure that happens.
Understood, thanks.
Could be an interesting discussion. Yeah, I'd like to see that Title 17 transportation is under the Planning Commission, just because it's always good to see what they're up to and what's coming to the city. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Moving forward to the study session for downtown public open space code amendments, Senior Planner Dave Boyd has a presentation.
Yes, thank you. Let me just pull that up and I'll come back to the table. We decided to, for various reasons, to break up the downtown code amendments that were initiated this year and take this public open space issue on separately. So start with this illustration of the community vision for the downtown plan. You look at it and you might be able to pick out here and there some spaces that might be open spaces that would have been could have been required as part of the downtown requirements. If you take a look at this plan view, it's a little bit more clear what some of those might be. This one is called out as, this is the half-acre open space that was required as part of this. So that's a little bit different, but some of these other courtyard type spaces depicted what those public open spaces might have looked like. And the basis in the community vision was to create a network or as quoted from the downtown plan, a sequence of unfolding spaces that inspire people to walk and to linger in the center of the city. So what's shown in this diagram are the actual publicly owned public spaces, including some of the major streets like Main Street and the Multi-Way Boulevard and Popkini Way. And these public open spaces required of private development would add to that and create another layer of public open spaces or open spaces accessible to the public. So the basis in the development regulations starts with the basic site development regulations that make reference to open space regulations and show that, as I mentioned earlier, that in the downtown plan, that includes spaces like a passage with that are a minimum 20 feet wide and have a walkway through the middle of them. So these open spaces that are open to the public but on private property are intended to complement the primary public streets and open spaces, and to be built with development or through in lieu fees per the code. So, and they're based on the number of dwelling units or the commercial area, and it varies depending on the district. In the downtown core district, where we're looking for lot line to lot line development, there's no public open space requirement. But in the other districts, there's either 100 or 150 square feet per unit. There's 1 square foot per 10 square feet of office space, and 100 square feet per room for lodging uses. There is a 20-foot minimum width with all in one space, except where more than 3,000 square feet is required. They can be developed as long as there's at least one that's 2,000 square feet and a minimum of 1,000 square feet with 15-foot width. They, as I said, would be built with the development or through in lieu fees. They need to be publicly accessible, connected to and abutting sidewalks, and open 24 hours a day per the code. That's one that we are probably going to look at, since our public parks are not open 24 hours a day. They need to be visible from surrounding streets, and there are various requirements and guidelines for elements like walls, fences, and furnishings. We added an amendment a few years back that said that where you have a requirement for a single open space, that it could be bisected by other open areas like a driveway if the overall open space can be experienced as a whole. And I'll show you an example of that here shortly. So as you'll recall, last year we brought this before you and sort of started to get into some of these more qualitative aspects of the public open space. But in the end, because of the time constraints that we had last year, we focused just on this one sort of technical amendment to make sure that there was clarity between these downtown plan public open spaces and the citywide park and open space impact fees. And as you saw in the packet, we're already introducing to take this one step further, to come up with a different name for the downtown public open space to avoid any correlation, to at least lessen the correlation with the citywide parks and public and parks and open space impact fees. When the downtown plan was written, there was the park impact fee was just that, a park impact fee. They did a study, and because of the addition of spaces like North Creek Forest, they changed their terminology to be park and open space impact fees, and that's created some concern about equating those two. So just wanted to share some examples that have been built or proposed today. On the far right, we have the 104 development. That was our first multifamily development in downtown plan. And they have 3 public open spaces. The entry courtyard qualifies, as do 2 courtyards on the north face that also serve to break up the building mass along 185th. Those courtyards are actually a mix of private open space that is associated with the units and public open space in the middle. So I did want to, as we go through here, have a bit of a discussion about these, about what works and what could be improved. One thing that we ran into on this site was the developer was struggling to fit all of the required public open space on that site. This site is wholly within the downtown neighborhood zone, so it did have 100 square feet per unit, which amounted to about 1/4 of an acre. And so initially they requested to pay part of it in a fee in lieu. And then since they were starting work on the Six Oaks development, they proposed being able to transfer some of that required open space from this site, to the Six Oaks site, which ultimately we agreed to allow. So before I open it up to what works and what could be improved, let me just touch on Six Oaks. There, this is primarily, up to about this point in the building, is in the downtown core district. So the only public open space requirement was on the downtown neighborhood portion of that project. So they wouldn't have been required to provide even as much as you see here without that transfer from the 104. And because of the unusual shape, the curved shape of the parcel, and because they wanted to preserve those Six Oaks here, they had an interest in doing more public open space here. So in addition to the space with the Six Oaks, which isn't a space that the public is really invited to enter into or walk through, we felt it did have a significant public benefit, though, just from being able to walk by those stately oaks. The other spaces include a small dog park that we did require them to make open to the general public, not just to their tenants. Their rain garden, part of their stormwater runoff, which we allowed because it also adds an open space amenity adjacent to the public sidewalk. And then courtyard around their rear entry all count towards their public open space. So any thoughts on these spaces, what works and what could be improved?
I got a few thoughts on them. I guess we need to look at the purpose, and as you're pretty much saying specifically, there are different benefits. When we look at the 104, those courtyards, I think there is a definite architectural benefit, breaking up the mass of the building. It just doesn't feel as big. Now, that said, those don't feel like, I mean, I've walked through there, and you don't feel like you feel like you're encroaching on those decks. They don't feel like public spaces. And I don't know that any of those spaces are clearly marked as public. I've been by all of them. So there's a benefit, certainly, but you don't feel invited into there. The entry spaces, boy, they really feel like they're dedicated to the building and not the public. But again, if it's breaking up the mass, I guess that's an architectural benefit, a visual benefit. But as far as a public use standpoint, I don't see a lot coming out of there.
Others?
I really appreciate the Six Oaks preservation of the mature trees there. I think it's a benefit for shade and street trees, traffic calming. There's so many benefits from that. But I can't help but wonder, when those trees get diseased or die, what's happening to that open space? Does it have a transformational use, or is it just a bark pathway right next to the sidewalk. When you have vegetation that you're protecting, it has to, I just struggle with the idea that this is going to be a permanent feature if we're enshrining it in a plat or in a zone, but then vegetation isn't always permanent, so that's something that I've been kind of struggling with.
Any others?
Couple of comments and questions. I agree with what the other commissioners have said. I don't necessarily, yeah, I'm not even going to get into repeating what they said. But as far as accessibility, I haven't spent any time at the open space at the 104, but can I assume that they're ADA accessible?
Yes.
Okay.
They're at grade entrance from
At grade,
right off the
okay.
sidewalk, yeah.
Okay. I know there was a reference to the POP having an elevator access to the second floor one, so I assume that they would be. I'm a big fan of signage and also ensuring that anybody who is a resident there, it's clear that they understand that this is a public open space. A question about the signage and closing. If a public space at one of these properties, for example, at the 104, is closed, is that closed just to the general public or for the people who live there as well?
I'm sorry.
So if, for example, the bottom right shows an open
Yeah.
space at the 104, if the hours that's open
Oh.
were signed, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., would that only apply to the general public, or would it apply to those who live there as well?
Good question. I think there might be an answer to that in the image coming up ahead that has a sign that does have hours posted. But I think you could sign it either way. The only space where that has come up, where a developer has said, we want to limit this to the hours that parks are open, has been that upper level space at the POP.
Okay. Okay, and then the last thing, I work in Seattle, and they have a really great guide that is on their website that shows maybe, I don't want to say all of their open spaces that are public on private property, but it has a pretty substantial list. I believe there's about 40 on here. And so I would advocate that the city, when resources were available, do something such as this to ensure that the public is aware that there's open spaces out there. Because I walk by the 104, ride my bike by it almost every day, and I had no idea that those were public spaces. And the dog run behind Six Oaks, Coda would love that. She's never been in there. So it would be great if the people who are supposed to get the benefit for this, and not just the people that live there, were to know about it. I can give this to you if you want.
Is there a requirement when they have these public open spaces to put a bench? Is it just an open space for the sake of an open space?
That's a good question.
I like the signage piece where it says, hey, this is a public space, but if there's, if it's not inviting, well, you don't even know it is. But second question is, you had mentioned that bottom right picture, the combination between, public space and then private property. Are there any requirements when they do something like this where they can add another 2 feet of height on the private property side, so it's pretty clear? Or that is like, well, you can hop over that and it's who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's,
I think this picture was taken fairly early on. I think since then, some of the private owners have added trellises and other
So they can do that, okay.
barriers to make their spaces more private without encroaching on the public space. And I can try to get a more recent picture of that for the next time. This was really intended as a very introductory level, even though we did, some of you all did participate in some preliminary discussion last year before we decided to focus on a more narrow amendment.
are these all within a certain radius of downtown? Because at the 104, I drive by it, I don't see a lot of foot traffic versus something down towards Six Oaks where you're gonna have McMinimans and all that area where I think it's a lot more applicable to have those spaces.
One thing about the 104 is 185th is, targeted to be the primary transit corridor. So the buses will all be in both directions, will be moving up to 185th. So that'll generate more pedestrian traffic on 185th. Plus, we're looking at, along that entire 185th Beardsley corridor, pedestrian improvements to make that a more attractive connection between the campus and downtown. So we do anticipate that being a little, getting a little more pedestrian activity. Okay, didn't want to, any other
Yeah.
comments, right? Yeah.
So we talked about this last summer, and I think it became apparent tonight, especially when I think about the earlier discussion we had. So what we're talking about here is it seems like it's being thrown out as one bucket, but it's actually two, right? It's usable open space versus open space, right? Like ignoring the merits of the 104 usability, it is a usable space. I can go there, I can sit down with a friend, we can have a conversation, that sort of thing. Where this tree is, it's not usable, but it definitely provides a public benefit. So it's interesting because I look back at what we were talking about earlier today. We were talking about opening open space tracks, and then the amendment here is designated outdoor space in the code amendments. And I'm just struggling for a second because we're trying to solve two problems with one term, one bucket, right? Because it seems like this is we are asking developers to allocate open space, but we're not clarifying that it should be usable open space or if it could just be open space.
Right.
And it is interesting because if we brought in 100 residents right now, sat them down and said, this space right here on the left, this is open public space. What's your thoughts? I imagine much of the feedback from the community would be, well, that's nice because it's beautiful and preserve the foliage and that sort of stuff, but it's not usable. And what happens when the tree dies? Like these are very valid questions. And then you say, okay, well, that's open space, but that's also open space as well. And ignoring the merits of, I think, how you could argue it struggles. And I am getting ahead because on the next slide, I'm looking at the medical office building, and I'm like, that's not open space to me. Like, it is open space. I'm not going to decline that it's not open space, but it's, I don't want the city of Bothell to have that as open space. I think those 100 residents that we sat down here would say they would rather take a little fee in lieu and buy an acre somewhere and turn that into a city park than to have 50 of these throughout the community. That's just my opinion. I'll stick with it.
So maybe it would be good to go through these all and then come back to ones with specific, unless people, feel free to jump in. This is meant to be quite informal as I go through, but and then we can, there are not that many examples, so we can get back. I've got a few examples that and illustrations that aren't in your packet as well. So the additional apartments is another one where here they set back the bulk of the building from the 185th Street edge and 20 feet, and this public open space serves both as an accessible entry to the common space at the west end of the site. And since it does go along the sidewalk, we did push hard to get a connection directly from the sidewalk to the other end of this linear open space, so that you could actually walk through it, would not just walk a long way down and then have to turn around and come back. And at the stairway, I don't know if you recall, there were two houses that were deemed eligible for the historic register that were removed for this project. And also there was a historic church that had burned down many years ago at the west end. And so we worked with them to place a plaque there, again, to draw people into that space and make it clear that it isn't just a building entrance. And what we didn't do, and to answer the Commissioner Bystrup's question about furnishings, even though the code, the guidelines say under site furnishings, it says public gathering spaces and other publicly accessible areas should be detailed with decorative pedestrian scaled site furnishings and equipment. We don't have a specific requirement for benches, and in hindsight, there are places within this, even though these walls could be used as seating walls, they're really not designed as such, and so there are places where benches would be useful.
David,
Yeah.
quick question. I'm assuming the property owner is responsible for keeping these in good condition?
Yes, they are responsible for maintaining them, so.
So am I safe to say that since they are responsible, are they doing the bare minimum to attract people in these public spaces? They, in lieu, you know, if people come through, they drop something, they got to clean it up.
That really hasn't come up yet, but yeah, they are responsible for maintaining them. So I think if we noticed that one of these was not being well maintained, we would work with the owner to see that is happening, and to the possible extent of having a code violation and enforcement action. Fortunately, we haven't gotten to that point.
So there's a large structure there. I think it's ventilation to the parking garage. Is that footprint part of the open space or separate from the open space?
I'd have to go back
And I know that's a detailed question to ask you right now, but.
And check on whether we allowed them or required them to subtract that out or not.
Because also going back to the health point one, I don't remember it's back or forward from where you are. Yeah, there's that large grate there, which I assume is necessary for their development. And I wonder if they got credit for that as well, so.
And again, I
understand these are details that's sitting right here.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that they did get credit for that whole space. And again, here on this particular project, the requirement was fairly small, and this seemed like a reasonable way to meet that. You know, they could have. The other way that we've used required public open space in the downtown plan, the downtown plan also has a requirement for solid street front of buildings. We have said that if you put your required public open space on the street front, we will let that substitute for building in terms of meeting that requirement, or even a build to corner requirement. If you create a corner public space, then that satisfies that build to corner element. I don't dispute that this is maybe not a great public benefit here, but it, again, similar to the courtyards at the 104, provides a little bit of breathing room and a break in if you could imagine that stretch of Beardsley as fully developed, maybe a few of those entry courtyards would be some welcome relief from that solid wall of building.
And I agree with that, that there are, as Commissioner Moreau-Cook indicated, there are a variety of, I'll say, benefits that we're looking at here. And breaking the mass, making it more visually interesting is also a benefit, although it's not a public use.
Mm-hmm. And also to respond to Commissioner Moreau-Cook's, I would define open space broadly in this sense, to include usable open space and what we might call breathing room open space, or just amenity, visual relief open space. And perhaps that's something that we need to put into the code as well. Oh, here, we didn't talk about across from the addition apartments, are three smaller infill projects. These are the kinds of projects that the fee and lieu provision was really intended for. We realized that there would be smaller projects that would have such a small open space requirement that it might not really make sense to do it on site, particularly with a site like this where the only place you could really put it would be in the front, and just in terms of what they're trying to do with that site, it was very difficult, if not impossible to do. This initially was a site, these two sites were under the same ownership, and there was some discussion of transferring their requirement to the larger site, but that they've since split apart in ownership. But raises another question: should we actually require the fee in lieu for some smaller projects, or should we have a minimum size for public open space? And conversely, should we? The thinking was that larger projects could provide their required public open space on site, but we've had requests from many larger projects to do a combination of providing it on site and fee in lieu. Should that be allowed? And I think the next, well, this not this example, but the POP is a good example of that. The MERC is similar to the addition. The building is set back from the sidewalk. The public open space goes over an underground or partly underground parking structure. Here, to the question about the wall height, I think here the taller wall height does work in favor of creating some separation between the public and private open space. This level of the public open space, this little terrace, is accessible, but you'd have to come back out. Then there's there are steps down from that to this space, and this here is another smaller public open space that's not over the parking garage and therefore has more plantings in it. So you see they have put two benches in this space. My feeling was that this space could really use something like that, or some amenity to draw people into it or make it feel more public. And again, these are all done with pretty immature plantings. Eventually, these plantings are designed to climb up and cover most of this bare wall. I'm not sure about this, so this might illustrate an issue with sort of wall treatments that are included in the guidelines, but might not be strong enough to get the desired result.
Well, I see that space being very popular on the 4th of July and probably not used much otherwise, that elevated one. But,
yeah.
And I'll repeat a comment I made at the meeting last year on fee and lieu, that I have a slight concern about that transferring operations and maintenance costs from the private party, picking up the litter and such, to the city, which would have those fee and lieu properties. Right. So I would think it should not be one-to-one. There should be a bit of a premium there to offset those ongoing O&M costs that are being transferred.
That's a good point. And our current formula for fee and lieu is based on the assessed land value and the calculated cost of developing it, but we haven't tried to factor in a maintenance
Yeah, if you look at long-term, and maintenance costs are not going to be that high for something like that, but you're going to have to sweep it periodically and pick up whatever. I mean, the 5th of July, there'll be stuff to pick up. And were that to be transferred to the city in fee and lieu, then those operating costs would go. And stretch it out over whatever period you look at, 30 years if it's a bond. Those costs would add up. Not tremendously, but they'd be there.
Yeah.
Dave, one quick question. You just mentioned how you calculate the fee and lieu costs. Are they significant enough to make a dent in some of the downtown park plans? Are they pretty minimal? It seems like a lot of projects elect to take that instead of reduce their development and include open space. So it,
Well, since we are basing it on what we feel is a real cost to provide that amount of space, we feel like we're getting value there, but they are generally small amounts, so they'll have to add up to become a significant contributor to any downtown parks. We also have to do some work to assure that they can be used for existing parks, because right now the parks that that have been identified in the capital improvement plan have been used to calculate the park impact, the citywide park impact fee. So we need to be careful not to double dip. With the half-acre open space or Horse Creek Plaza now, that one did include an allowance for developer contributions. So there's a little bit easier way to direct these fee in lieu of monies to that one. But the other one that would be a likely candidate for that would be the expansion of the park at Bothell Landing. And so we are going to be looking, and that's not a code issue, that's more of an administrative issue of ways that we can make sure that we can do that without getting into running afoul of issues over double dipping or so that's a good point.
thanks.
So Dave, without being overly prescriptive on what's required of these open spaces, how do we get more activated spaces or spaces that people are going to want to spend time in?
I'll get to one example of that here shortly, and actually there's some examples that may do that, and I'll be interested in your thoughts about those.
Actually,
Oh,
Dave, I've got
Yeah.
one quick point on this slide. So without going back, a lot of the other spaces that you showed us look like the left one. And I'm going to say not very inviting, not someplace I would actively seek to go to.
Yeah.
This one on the right actually strikes me because in a urban setting, having a small pull-off like that you can go take a quick breather, as you called it earlier, a meetup point with friends, hey, the place by the Merc, let's meet there. It's much more inviting, and also to not be too prescriptive. Like, would there be some way to advocate or call out something along the lines of at grade level, like these spaces being at grade level? Because we talked about and forgive me what the other complex is, where it was like on the second floor, like a lot of us talked about, we're not sure we know how to get to that, right? Like, it's not clear. This is in the open, it's right there, it's at I realize it's on a hill, but it's basically at ground level. And it's much more accessible as an open space. And I'm not advocating the downtown Bothell area having lots of these, but I would much rather see that than that. I'd rather see the smaller open spaces to the right that are at easy accessible, inviting, than say something with a fence around it that's 3-4 feet above grade.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's a thing. I don't know how commissioners feel as well, if there's some way for us to codify that to say at grade level.
We could.
What are the developers, I can honestly think, what they probably think about these? The one left, like you said, that's built for not a lot of traffic. I mean, if you're walking on the sidewalk, why would you go up and around and go back down? It makes no sense to me.
Well, so an able-bodied person can go through here and then down the stairs to this space, and maybe this, yeah. Or, yeah, you could,
It almost has a wall barrier saying, don't come up here.
I think that is an issue. So is there some feature of this, like the plaque that we put at the top of the stairs at the addition, that would at least encourage people to make this little detour?
I think it's the developers are doing this just to appease the city. It's kind of a joke, actually. It's almost like a middle finger to Bothell saying, hey, we'll do this, but we're gonna make it really inaccessible versus the one on the right. I'm not sure if there's a way that we can make it amenable to both parties to say, hey, this is a good thing for the city, it's a good thing for you guys.
Yeah. It may not be as inaccessible as it appears, so it is pretty easy to get there and to get there on the bottom side up the short flight of stairs.
I want to.
but
I just want to say I don't
not
think
inviting, yeah.
I don't think we're focusing on this one exclusively.
Yeah.
A number of the ones that you've showed us tonight are not
Yeah.
invitable.
Yeah.
Again, the right one strikes me as being more invitable if we're going to create these smaller open spaces.
Having more potential. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
that's the question, because I agree with you. If there was a bench on the top one and you can see would that be
Yeah.
an opportunity to go up that way? It would soften up a little bit.
It would soften it. I don't think it would pull me in.
If I could add and try to answer his question, I remember when my son was little and we'd stroll along, grab a coffee or something, and you can't really just let your, I don't want to say toddler, but like young child run around on the sidewalk because there's cars and there's people walking. But if I was with a friend and wanted to sit up there and there was a bench, it seems like it would be a great spot to kind of let a couple of 4-year-olds kind of run off some steam. They're protected by the fence, or specifically the addition example. I think that would be a great place to, take a couple little ones on I hate this term, but the play date and grab a coffee and kind of get away from the sidewalk. So if we could require more prescriptive streetscapes and what's up there, I think it would be more. I think it would be a much better use of space. I'm actually, frankly, a little upset that I now know that is a public space and that it's so inhospitable. But that's another comment. This isn't supposed to get personal, right?
Yeah.
I do think a bench would make that a different space. So I think that the one thing I want to note, I agree with having something on the second level. That probably doesn't really meet our open space objectives as much. But this one, obviously, they've got a challenge with their elevations and their parking garage, and they're trying to do what they can. So I think we have to be a little bit flexible to work with what the developers have to do. I mean, there's got to be a middle ground.
What about murals and sculptures and pavement markings like hopscotch or,
Yeah.
they could be more inviting with public art.
That's gonna cost the developer way too much more than they wanna spend.
Murals, maybe not.
Unless you wanna hire a public person to go paint stuff, but having been on the development side of things, any added cost is not a good thing. They're gonna resent that.
Well, I think if you presented it as a canvas, you'd probably get somebody out there to do something for free on the ground. And Dave, you made reference to plaques as well. I think I raised this at the previous meeting a while ago. If you had some sort of walk through downtown, and on this future website, when you have spare time and money, said with a smile, if you did identify a walkthrough, and I've looked at the plaque at the addition and looked at the houses, and if there was something here, and I know when I visit different cities, I'll Google, walk in whatever town, and, here are 4 spots to look at and 4 things to learn, and then you move on. That might draw some people through it.
Was this the facility we had the big fire?
Yes.
That might be kind of a cool plaque. Say, 2 years, whatever, 3 years ago at this date, I mean, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And this building, further down on the brick face of the main street facade, they did halfway sort of recreate one of the old wall signs that was on the Mercantile building. And yeah, we could have pushed harder to get more of that sort of treatment, not only on this upper plaza, but on these lower walls as well.
So I think what I'm hearing from everybody is more inviting open space, whether it's signage or benches, murals, more accessibility. I think that's what we're looking for, and I think some of these are not succeeding at that goal.
Right. That's coming in clear. So these are the examples of the the illustrations from the POP that were in your packet. So this one's a little abstract, but this was the developer's graphic argument for why the public open space requirement didn't make any sense for development. Basically, it's this bright green circle. This is the site. This is the half-acre open space, Horse Creek Plaza, and then also the Popkini Way with the Horse Creek running down this side and the wide public open space. So those are designed to serve as promenades up to Popkini Stadium. So they made the argument that, you know, as a developer on the former school district property, they were contributing to this. They happened to help build this because they were doing this, the junction development, and pushed hard to get some relief from this amount of public open space, and then proposed some out-of-the-box solutions. One was taking their parking access driveway and making that what's called in planning circles a Woonwerf. It's a Dutch term for a space that's where cars and people can safely share the space. And then they also proposed that portion of this upper level terrace, which is also the access to 3 townhomes from the terrace level, would be open to the public, and as was mentioned, with elevator access to that area. So, and initially there was a small corner of the site here that would be also part of their public open space and essentially be an extension of Horse Creek Plaza here. That was the decision ultimately was somewhat grudgingly to allow these with a couple of conditions. We didn't want to create a public open space here that would just be a dead end. So, and they only had a sliver of open space here on their property, but the school district owned the rest of that up to the retaining wall for Popkini Field. So we said, if you can find a way to work with the school district, get them to agree to let you utilize that area as a connection through to the end of the Horse Creek Plaza here, and create a passageway around so people could go out and walk their dog around the building or whatever, and do it in such a way that truly is safe for pedestrians, that you have some surveillance, both active and passive surveillance of that space. Show us that it can work, and we'll consider that. As far as the upper level space, we said you're going to have to provide signage that makes it very clear that that is open to the public. Beyond that, we are requiring that they do some programming, especially in the first couple of years, that they have seasonal public events there so that people will be invited up there and learn that it is open to the public. It's a bit of an experiment. We'll see how that turns out and whether that is a viable way. And I would actually encourage Planning Commission maybe to, we can certainly consider some amendments related to that, but I'd encourage you to at least consider waiting to see how that works out before necessarily banning that. We can always come back with additional code amendments in a couple of years after we see how that's working out. And then I wanted to show you, this is a more developed plan for those spaces now. The Woonwerf area will have decorative pavement and other treatments to slow down the cars that are accessing the garage. And of course, they'll be able to educate their tenants to treat that as a shared space. They've added a half-court basketball at the end, and this was originally negotiated just with the Phase 1 project over here. They're now starting to work on Phase 2. These will be townhomes here, and have proposed that we consider the entirety as in terms of the open space requirement, which allows them to provide a small open space right off the sidewalk here, but also an expansion of this more active portion of that at the end of the Wooner there. So that's what's currently being proposed. This hasn't gone through fully been vetted through our review process, but that's the next iteration of design for the POP open space. Along the way, what we considered the most valuable piece of their public open space here, they came back to us and said that they have a tenant for this, which is their office space, a daycare. And the way that office was, or commercial space was defined in the development agreement, did allow that use, and we thought it was actually a good use for downtown, something that would be an amenity for downtown. But they needed this public open space for the daycare open space, the play space. So it'll still be visually open, but it'll be gated, and some of these additions that they've proposed in the overall space puts them over their total required public open space.
Is there going to be, I'm going back to this shared space between pedestrians and cars. I still can't wrap my head around how it's going to work. Is there going to be parking on that, or is it access to?
Access to parking, yeah.
Okay.
So there's two garage entrances here and here. There's one more slide here.
Sorry, and just to clarify, right, it is effectively a, say, grassed over driveway, effectively?
No, it's just decorative paving.
I had to Google an image just to double check what it looks like.
Okay. And so how wide is it?
It is 20 feet wide, 20 to 24 feet wide, and 24 foot wide.
I want to say for the record, and I'm sure everyone here will appreciate it, we are not specifically talking about this, but this development tonight, like this is not the point, but for me personally, we've talked about this development before. I'm a little hesitant to hear these things happen, and you know, like a 20-foot driveway, decorative, is a driveway, not open space, in my opinion. And I'm a little hesitant to be signing in the future if a developer wants to build a building in downtown Bothell to use the open space for a driveway that's shared. I'm a little hesitant.
Or vice versa. Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Use the driveway as open space.
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant about this because, like, we talked, I brought it up, right? Like, open space, this whole open space discussion has two things. It's usable, or it's not usable. And the open space, like for Six Oaks, has a tree. That's beautiful. This is a driveway. It's usable as a driveway, not as open space, I guess, to the dictionary definition. And it's not beautiful, no matter how decorative it can be. So I'm very cautioned by this conversation, and I understand that. I think in the future, I'd like Planning Commission to make sure that we are coming up with rules to help guide the city to be careful about having these types of open space concessions in the city.
Dave, can I ask a quick question for you? The main entrance to this driveway, if you will, is from Thorsk, right?
Yes.
So if that wasn't a public open space, there'd be no requirement for a connection all the way through, right? So
Yes.
we're essentially getting another opportunity to cut through for the public. So there's more
Yeah.
pedestrian paths,
That's the only
right?
way we
So you
would've
don't have to walk all the way around the
allowed that.
building. So that is somewhat of a public benefit I can see. And then you also connect all the way around the building with that pedestrian path because of the way that it was set up.
Yeah.
So I do see that as a bit of a benefit because it's a big block otherwise.
Yeah, this is another one. I think it's hard to see how this could work and be a public benefit. We struggled with it, and I think we ultimately decided to give it a try and try to work with them to make sure that it worked as well as possible, and one where I would hope we'd give it, see how it comes out and how it works. I think and I can also give you some examples. I don't have them right off my head, but in South Lake Union, there's a development that did something similar to this. Actually, I think now that I think of it, there are a few, but one that particularly pushed this whole VUNERF concept, and so maybe I'll get some example or some images of that, and also let you know where that is, so you can go and check it out for yourselves.
Well, I like the idea that you combine, that the two pieces or the two phases being planned together. I think you'll always get a better product comprehensively planning it than incrementally, so that's a good thing. On the upper level, okay, wait and see. I think it's extremely important that it be signed, and not signed for the public, but also signed for those 3 residents, so that they know when there are strangers wandering around up there, they're allowed to be there.
Yeah.
And it's not encroaching on their personal space, but rather we are taking advantage of designated public space. I'll be interested in seeing how the programming to encourage public use goes. I know Seattle does a lot of that in a lot of spaces, which are bigger and there's higher density and all that, so I wouldn't expect that level of activity, but seeing that introduced is something that I'll look forward to.
Anything else? I do have a little more detail also on the VUNERF and some of the things that they're proposing to both activate and to calm the traffic there and make sure that it is safe. Everything from the convex mirrors at the driveways and additional lighting and pavement treatment.
Can you confirm that the Sonics logo is actually going to be on it? Because that's cool.
Well, and they are bringing the Sonics back, so that's what they're proposing. So, and then the seating areas within the space to make it so that the errant driver doesn't extend, come back into beyond the driveway. And they'll have removable bollards also to prevent that.
Other than the public spaces, are we requiring these guys for public parking at all? I know we lost quite a bit of parking on Main Street when they redid that. I know City Hall's open to public parking. I'd personally rather see more parking than some open space. When you come downtown or have family and friends come in, sometimes it is difficult to find parking. When all the residents coming in here, I question is, what are we doing about that?
Well, you mentioned Main Street. The Main Street redesign actually added a couple of parking spaces from what was there before. Because, well, before there was angled parking on in alternate sides. The final count was a small increase in parking. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know it was at least a space or two additional. But there's really no mechanism for requiring a developer to provide public parking. We require them to provide parking for their units. Now, we would certainly be open to working with a developer to that was interested in creating some public parking through some sort of partnership, but we haven't identified funding to support that ourselves. There's been some talk about opportunities to do that. There, adjacent to this is where Sound Transit is looking to potentially do their 300 stall park and ride as part of ST3 on the Popkini parking lot side. And we would certainly be working with them to ensure that after hours, after the commute hours, that it would be available to public for evening visitors to downtown. So that's, I think that's about as much as we have done or considered in terms of public parking. So moving on, the other thing we talked about last time was I suggested that as you were off on your summer travels that you got a errant little piece of text in the middle of that. But I just came back from a couple of weeks in Paris and a couple of nights in Reykjavik. And one thing, and so I knew this was coming up, so I was on the lookout for open spaces that weren't necessarily obviously public parks, but were, I don't know that any of these are actually on private property. They may very well be public property, but these are both sort of courtyard public open spaces. And the one thing that maybe impressed me the most about Paris is how well they do their parks and open spaces and how well they're maintained. Almost all of them had beautiful planting beds, and I hardly ever saw any maintenance workers in these spaces. So I don't know if they're there through the night keeping them trimmed. But so these are some examples that maybe we could strive for, at least in terms of the public space, if not in terms of the architecture. Or a little on the more modest scale in the more medieval sections of Paris with the narrow winding streets, just these little residual spaces that you get in buildings. And this is kind of similar to the entry courtyards at the back, particularly maybe the back end of Six Oaks. Spaces are not unlike these. They don't have the shops in them necessarily that really activate these kind of public open spaces, but at least there they'd have put out tables and chairs if someone were to want to use those. So just a little bit of food for thought from Paris. Other issues beyond, and I think we've covered these, but that we want to deal with, and I'll do some more analysis in the next packet, is the required amount. Do we have the right required amount? We hear from the developers that it's too much, that it's really hard to develop a site with the required amount of open space. Thus, the proposals to provide part of it on site and then pay fee in lieu for the rest of it.
Hey, Dave, on the required amount, have we done a comparison of neighboring communities or communities that we would like to mimic?
I will bring a comparison. I actually got one from a planner that is working on some standards for Mount Lake Terrace, and they were looking at what we were proposing. In fact, I've got a 5-slide PowerPoint presentation on what they're proposing there. They're basing it not on units or square footage of area, but of lineal frontage of the building. And I've barely had a chance to look at it myself. I put it, it's available if you would like to take a look at that. But and they also shared with me a table that they were working on comparing different cities' requirements, but they didn't have Bothell's right, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't have a chance to proof test that one. So that's the thing. Do we have the right amount in the first place? Should we establish a minimum area If you're, for example, if your requirement is 750 feet or less, or 500 feet or less, or I don't know what, since our minimum dimension is 20 feet, maybe 20 by 20 would be the minimum, 400 feet or less. We don't want those little postage stamp spaces. You need to pay the fee in lieu. Signage, this is an image that Carrie Westerbeck actually provided after a former discussion. This is a signage that's being used in Seattle, and it does include the hours of operation, and it explains that it is on private property provided as a public amenity. So I think that pretty much does what we would want it to do. We might, talk to Seattle, see if we could just steal that design entirely or come up with our own, but I wanted to put that out there as something to consider. And along with it, the hours of operation. And I think the proposal that we got from at the POP to limit it to the hours that our own public parks are open seems reasonable. The connection to the sidewalk we've talked about a little bit, and our code currently requires it to be connected to the sidewalk and also to abut the sidewalk. So in the terms of the second level one at Six Oaks, it is connected either up the stair or via the elevator, and it actually does abut the sidewalk except at the upper level. So do we need to clarify that? Do we need to tweak that? Or are there examples like, let me just go back. If this was a separate development project and not part, a phase of this overall, and had to do their own, would we allow that? Would that be allowed? It doesn't abut the sidewalk on its own. The Wunderf does, that connects it to the sidewalk does, but do we need to, and it's maybe a little bit confusing how the code says it needs to be connected in one place and abutting in another. So do we want to tweak that language?
Dave,
And then,
sorry, Dave, real quick on hours of operation. I think a logical separation here would be a lot of these places should adhere to park hours, definitely respect quiet hours, but like a public path, it may make sense to have different hours, right? Like I'm not even going to try that word. The pathway at the POP, if our hours for these spaces is say 6 to 9, I would hate to say this is not a public space at 9:15 or 9:30. It seems more like 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock would be more logical to keep it open through. So just maybe there's two definitions of public space.
And then a requirement for, currently the code does not require a permanent easement for these public open spaces, and there isn't a crew requirement, for example, for the spaces at Six Oaks. What happens when the trees die? We assume, since they named the building after the trees, that they'll plant new ones, but that hasn't been specified. For the POP, since they were pushing the envelope, and we did require them to set aside those areas in a permanent easement before they can be certified for occupation. So, and I think we want to include that for all of these. And I'm trying to get away from calling them public open spaces to get back to the designated public spaces. I think unless the commission has other ideas for how to name these, and other ideas, other issues that you think we should be tackling that haven't been raised so far.
I want to point out that you really raised the bar. And I don't remember a single time that Bruce came back from vacation with pictures related to his next presentation. So as a transit nerd who drags my family around to different transit systems in the world, I can appreciate what you're doing there. But Bruce, I think he just kind of threw down.
Okay,
So
I'll bring photos of my Lewis and Clark sites.
I can't, but you have to tie it into the topic at hand.
That's open space,
All right, okay, fair enough.
big
I-
open space.
I'm sure he would accept a trip to Paris as well.
Of course, right, yeah, no, see it. So as far as your comment about the easements, has the city attorney's office given their input on that, or do we know what other cities require?
They have on the POP agreement, they were involved in the POP agreement. We haven't, I have a little bit of homework to do that I didn't get to by this. I also need to run all of this by, again, the city attorney's office, as well as the Parks Department, and I think I will, well, I'll offer to take this discussion to the Parks Board as well, if they're so inclined. I also feel like I need to do some outreach to the development community, and I think it would be useful for the Planning Commission to hear their concerns directly. And perhaps, this is a little bit out of the box, in situations where a developer is struggling to provide the public open space, perhaps an option would be to provide affordable housing in lieu of the public open space.
Or parking.
Or parking.
One question I had is the overall idea of why we're doing this. City of Seattle, I mean, they've destroyed all their parks. They have to make these open spaces. City of Bothell, there's already a lot of parks here, and are we creating unnecessary space with some of these facilities where other major metropolitan areas they require? I mean, you need this. I would, truth be told, I probably would never visit one of these spaces. I go to Bothell Landing or any of the many parks within the downtown area. I just don't see where the end game is with this.
So I personally see this a little bit differently, right? Like, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to just give my vision real quick. In 200 years from now, when we are long gone, right? To your point, like the city of Seattle doesn't have a lot of those parks because they weren't set aside. And so like if I was to draw my Bothell in 200 years, we would have probably taller buildings in downtown Bothell, but I'm hoping that the people around this time would be preserving lots, areas that would be open space, parks, that sort of thing, because when every single lot in downtown Bellevue or Bothell is redeveloped and put a 10, 20-story building down, just having those small 400 square foot, 1,000 square foot breathing spaces is going to be important. So I think this is important when I think beyond our lifetimes, beyond our kids and our kids' lifetimes. But you know, that's what I would say. We do have. I feel weird saying it. We do have considerable park space in the city of Bothell, but I want to think 150 years or 100 years from now, when the city of Bothell is 300,000 people, and I know, sorry to everybody listening online, but you know, if Bothell is that many people, we need to make sure there is open space then, because if we don't do it now, it's not gonna come back later on. And sorry to be a little like way ahead, but like that's the type of thing when I think of these is just we're trying to set up for success over a longer period. I sure hope we don't have 20-story buildings in Bothell anytime soon.
Well, and as we've discussed at a couple points during this presentation, there are multiple I'll say benefits to the public space. And one of them certainly is a place that you go to and you experience that space. There's also the benefit of breaking up the wall of concrete and having, you know, being more, getting light in. You know, when I look at, I'm not a real fan of, I'll just say the addition because it's a big, long building, but by setting it back, it does let some light onto the sidewalk. So it opens it up a little bit. And the 104, breaking it up with those courtyards, again, you get some light, you get some variation. So, and I have made a point of walking with my dog in both of those spaces. And you really do have to make a point to enter them. They're not destinations. But driving by, you get that other benefit of the space. And, we've talked about the trees. They're there now. Hopefully there'll be trees in the future.
And is this called public space or public open space or open space?
Dave?
Well, currently, the plan calls it public open space, and we are suggesting that we change that to, the term that we've come up with is designated public space. So to distinguish it from our parks and open space fee, and also to, I guess, reinforce that has been designated as accessible to the public. So we're not married to that terminology. So if there are others that have other suggestions, we're open to that. I did want to point out in this last slide, I also threw in one image from Reykjavik. That's not Paris. And just another small open space. I don't think this is necessarily publicly accessible, but it's on a shopping street and certainly adds to the experience and adds some richness to the streetscape. So obviously we don't have any public here for testimony. I will work on doing some more outreach for the public hearing on June 10th. And then I have gotten feedback to bring back to you some analysis of what other communities are requiring along these lines, and any other additional analysis that you would like. Okay. Thank you.
One quick note, so we're bringing this back July 10th, correct?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Just making sure.
July 10th.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, I don't work that fast.
Anyone else have
I'm gonna
anything?
move off of that slide just so don't create too much confusion. And I will endeavor to bring back on July 10th a packet with code amendments that you could approve as your recommendation, along with findings. But this may be an issue that will need to continue over past the August break, and maybe you'll be able to do some more homework on your August vacations and bring back other examples.
Okay, I forget the rules, but do we need to close the study session or do we just move to old business?
I think you just move on. Yeah.
Okay. Nothing indicating old business. Reports from staff?
Just wanted to touch on the calendar. One thing we omitted from the June calendar is on June 11th, along with the critical area regulation study session at council, we have one other item, the initiation of potential residential activity center minimum density limits. Is that right? On the 18th. Oh, that is on there. Sorry. I thought there was one other thing that got added on the 11th. The small cells wireless facility code amendments public hearing has been postponed, so that will not be on the 18th. And, oh, I know, we wanted to, so we put I know that we've talked about limiting planning commission meetings to the first and third Wednesdays, but planning commission did decide not to meet on July the 3rd, and so I tentatively scheduled two items: the downtown public open space code amendments public hearing, and a public hearing on the nursing home code amendments that I'll be bringing to you on June 19th for July 10th. But I wanted to offer that to the commission. We could put that along with the potential Canyon Park update on the 17th and not have a meeting on the second Wednesday. Certainly we wanted to confirm that we would, if the commission is inclined to do it on the 10th, that we would have a quorum. So what are the thoughts there? Any preferences between the 10th and the 17th?
I'm open to the 10th. I'd prefer that. I'm not able to make the meeting on the 17th, so if I could be a part of it, I'd be happy. Thanks.
I'm out the 10th. I'm available the 17th.
I have approximately a 5% chance I will not be here on the 10th, but I'll be here 95% of the time.
On the 17th.
10th,
And you're good on the 17th?
guaranteed 17th. Sorry, wow, yeah. Guaranteed 17th, 95% chance on the 10th.
As of today, I'm good for both.
I'm also good for both.
I'm good for the 17th. I've got a little bit of uncertainty around the 10th for some personal matters.
Well, we've got 4.
Is David expected back anytime soon, do we know?
He is expected back for the 19th, and I will have to check with him about the 10th.
For fun, should we consider the 24th?
For fun.
Okay.
Personally, I'm all for flexibility, but I know that that's probably not gonna go over well with others. So let me confirm. Well, I know that David, I'm pretty sure that he is available the 17th. Let me confirm that, but let's at least tentatively assume that we'll do it on the 17th then, because there was only one. There were one out and 2 questionables on the 10th, and just one out on the 17th at this point. So,
You know, having been the one that had hoped it would be on the 10th, if Bruce's update for Canyon Park is brief, it makes the most sense to respect everybody's time and do it on the 17th along with that. You know, Commissioner Cabe won't be here on the 10th. I won't be here on the 17th. So, you know, don't do this for me if it makes sense to have one meeting.
okay.
Okay. Reports from members.
I have a report. I was at the city council meeting last night, and there was a announcement for the PROS survey. It's the Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces, or open space plan. They're getting ready for updating that. Parks and Recreation is, and everyone was encouraged, the city is encouraged to fill out the survey. It's on the banner on the webpage. So it kind of has some application to this commission too, and so I feel like it's something that we should all probably take advantage of.
Thanks for reminding us that.
Yeah, thank you. I have one note. I talked to Chair Vliet a couple days ago, and he sounded like he was in pretty good spirits despite what he went through. Definitely a long recovery back, but he's looking forward to coming back in 2 weeks. So he appreciated everyone reaching out to him. So. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Meeting's adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you.